can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Data and AI Strategies for the Streaming Ecosystem. I'm Nisha Sharma. I'm Head of Partnerships here at MediaMint, and we're really excited that you're joining us today. We recently announced that we became a Snowflake Select partner, and while there are many use cases for marketing and advertising, today we're going to be chatting about how we can use Snowflake to help streaming platforms and advertisers when it comes to activating data faster, unifying insights across channels, and powering AI-led performance measurement. So I am really excited to be speaking with two experts in the streaming media space. First, we have Michael Cohn, who is Vice President of Growth for Platforms at MediaMint. He's been in the media space for over 15 years and previously served as Head of Business Development for CTV at Samba TV, and then moved on to Head of Linear at Roku, managing the ad-supported FAST business globally. He then founded his own digital media and commerce consultancy before joining MediaMint earlier this year. And we also have Drew Holland, who is Regional Vice President of Solution Engineering at Snowflake, focused on communications, media, and entertainment. Drew has over 12 years of experience in the media space, coming from A&E Networks and Warner Brothers Discovery before joining Snowflake almost 3 years ago. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining today. Today's discussion will focus on two main areas. First, building a unified data foundation across the streaming ecosystem and how brands, platforms, and publishers in that ecosystem will benefit from it. And second, we'll discuss how you can improve cross-channel attribution with advanced data techniques and AI. So let's just get right into it with a nice conversation with Drew and Michael. So Drew, I'll start with you for the first question. From your perspective at Snowflake, what are the biggest data challenges that you're seeing streaming platforms face today?
That's a great question, Nish. Thanks. I think the reality is the streaming platforms have their data challenges, dealing with event level data at massive scale across, tens of thousands of users or more. But I think it's more, how does that bolt on to the rest of their business, right? A lot of these streaming publishers have massive linear businesses, digital businesses, and while they might be first party rich in their streaming platform data, as you start to get into those other businesses where they might not have full coverage in the linear side, or they're dealing with a lot of unauthenticated traffic on the digital side, it's really a challenge to present their whole business together from not just a data perspective, but then downstream to being able to effectively package and sell this in mass. And again, they're dealing with, I think, sort of the systemic business challenges of having such a massive footprint across all of these channels that they're working hard and fast to get the best picture possible of their customer for both internal reasons and to bring to the distribution and the marketer space. But it is a very difficult challenge. And again, I think the more Snowflake works with them, it's leveraging our marketplace to stitch together this from a third-party perspective and helping them out on the activation side, and whether that's internal for promo and push, or external for their own marketing, or external for their advertisers.
Thank you for that. Michael, how, just building on that, how are these data challenges that Drew described, how are they impacting the brands and the ecosystem players that are advertising with them?
Yeah, I mean, it is a fragmented world. I mean, as Drew kind of pointed out, I mean, we have these services that may be distributed on 20+ platforms across multiple territories with data obfuscation and definitions of data. What is a play? What is an actual session or a user, a view, whatever they might be? They define each one of those differently on each one of these platforms. And then again, navigating different laws about how you can use that data, what you can retain, and how you can, organize that information is really broken in lots of different ways. So the more you are able to control and organize your information, the better off you're going to be.
Drew, any comments on that as well?
No, yeah, again, I think the multi-territory adds another massive data challenge layer. You're dealing with data residency, you're dealing with different laws on capture, storage, and activation. So, the data often has to play catch up to some of the real world challenges from a privacy and legal standpoint. And that obviously makes kind of stitching this all together internally much more difficult or at a very forced aggregation level.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about AI, obviously, and Drew, I wanted to get your thoughts on, how do you see AI in expanding what's possible beyond traditional data modeling? Talking about some of the first party data challenges and such that you mentioned there.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and I am certainly not the one to fully predict the future, but I think one area that I find incredibly interesting is using the LLMs to model on effectively dimensions and variables that you don't even know about these people. So taking their behavioral elements with some demographic information and being able to ask for, propensity scores, likelihood or categorical elements that you can create on the fly. I think from a marketing perspective, that has a lot of value. I think from a publisher sell side perspective, that has immense value. Any of the exotic segments that customers can potentially want to leverage are now at your fingertips if you have pretty good first party data or great first party data and great third party data. And I think that's a super important call out is I actually think it makes the third party data providers even more valuable because behavioral elements on your platform only go so far. Being able to tie them to the traditional demographic information is going to make this segmentation from an LLM that much more accurate. And you can also sanity check if the LLM is giving you fairly accurate answers on some of the deterministic demographic information. You can now ensure that the segments that you cannot get from a third party provider are in fact fairly accurate or directionally enough where there's still value, even if it's just in creating a seed audience.
Mhm, mhm. And Michael, from your experiences, are you seeing examples, where there's been improved data unification and AI enhanced modeling, and that's directly improved campaign performance for brands and publishers? Any examples that you've seen?
I mean, I would say the majority of the uses of AI that I've seen have been around optimizing, kind of what Drew was just talking about, right? Especially around targeting and acquisition, right? So you might think if you were running a specific luxury car campaign, let's say, just as an example, a Mercedes, you want to sell Mercedes, you're thinking that maybe everybody who wants a BMW is also your target and you want to conquest that way. But maybe there are other factors. And I have seen people use machine learning and AI techniques to be able to optimize the targeting and the makeup of those audience segments in really improved ways. I mean, the biggest examples of optimization that I have seen have mostly been around connecting the target audiences to that point of purchase. I mean, this is the whole reason why everybody's looking at how Amazon has been eating the advertising market, the reason Walmart went out and bought Vizio so they connect the TV market to that purchase funnel. And also the reason why companies like Roku and Comcast Universal are increasing their utilization of clean rooms to connect the tissue between that third party or multiple first party data sets. And then also, brands like Chase and Kroger's are increasing their focus and investment in connecting that data and optimizing against that return on ad spend.
Yeah. Does that mean that I'll stop getting the ads once I've purchased a product and, stop showing me all these shoes? I already bought them.
Well, optimally, yeah, but it would also, they know when you're going to run out of paper towels, hypothetically, because they know your frequency of purchase, and then maybe I can find the optimal moment to show you that ad and hopefully have some pathway to with low friction for you to be able to execute on that one.
And I think too, when we think about like the full funnel, the more performance marketing doesn't want to hit you right after that purchase, but there is still that brand building and brand affinity that we want to find the optimal frequency for. And this is why this space has always been so fascinating to me, is it is this gigantic puzzle, right? And that puzzle is forever moving and changing based on your behaviors, what the brand is offering in the marketplace, what competitors are doing. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me in the AI space, is not that it is even close to a silver bullet, but hopefully it allows you to iterate more and iterate faster to try to assemble as much of the puzzle as possible before the pieces start shifting and moving or the picture is changing.
And I remember, Drew, I love this story that you were telling me about, when you're watching content, when you're watching a movie or something, and the placement of, an ad during that, right? When, if there's like a dark, horror scene or something, do you want a laundry detergent commercial coming right after that kind of thing, right? And as you mentioned, the placement and the timing and knowing these
And
things.
yeah, and I think the answer is that could be the best or worst time, and it could be the best or worst time depending on the person. But being able to test that out at a fairly decent scale to then optimize on, you know, subsets of individuals, like that stuff is fascinating to me. And there's just so much overhead in trying to orchestrate all of this. Like a lot of the pipes are all there. It's how do we supercharge the humans to be able to effectively run this type of, A through Z testing. And then we can, again, like to me, this is all a forever iteration. But again, I think we're getting to the point where we have a lot of the tools to really help us do this at scale in sort of a micro segmentation world to be able to validate these assumptions or completely go against the assumptions. But that to me is still a win if you're doing it at small scale and you can now course correct.
And this is where the AI really helps because that escalates the speed to be able to make those changes, right? Previously, we were waiting for weeks and weeks of data, pouring through it, having several different internal meetings about, okay, is this actually the signal or is this noise? And trying to figure it out from there. The AI is really where we can have that happen in moments.
Yeah. So, Michael, on the subject of attribution, I've heard that it's one of the toughest challenges in streaming. Why is it so hard?
There are so many people who are touching the audience at any given time. I think we've already seen historically how uh, the last touch, which is how we've given attribution in the past, is not optimal. That's not necessarily the reason why. Also, there's not on TV in particular. Most people can't execute on that. So the attribution there is sometimes broken to be able to connect all those disparate devices. Outside of QR codes, there's only like a minimal opportunities for like native uh, last mile conversions happening. So, and even within that, there's a whole bunch of friction that happens from there. Oh, like, did I go visit that QR code, but maybe I don't want to do that right now. I'm going to do it later. I don't want to interrupt my session. I want to keep going. Or they just lose it and maybe they come back to it. I think of it a month later. How do I connect that tissue between that disparate device when I'm someplace else on a different Wi-Fi, when a device graph or IP addresses aren't necessarily going to help me as they change and become less reliable as targeting sources. And then when you think about those native solutions, like there's a level of trust. Like nobody wants to in these conversion opportunities wants to go stop, put in a credit card into a random or third party website. I don't know how I feel about it. Do I trust? Do I think that this is actually going to be what I wanted it to be? There's some ingrained level of trust with these bigger brands that already have. I know if I'm using Apple Pay, I know I can trust it. I know my Amazon, if I can do a one-click thing and there's less friction, I already have that built in, and I'm not worried about what's going to happen to my data, even though they are also using that for retargeting.
And Drew, then from your perspective, what strategies are you seeing companies implement to improve this cross-channel attribution, particularly in the streaming environment?
Yeah, I think we've reached a point where there's sort of general awareness that there is no one silver bullet, whether it's last touch, multi-touch, media mixed modeling, incrementality. All of them give you some signal and some noise, but understanding which of those you get sort of a more immediate readout and testing, is that flowing downstream, right? And again, not to hammer the test, test, test and iterate, but it is like, what is last touch attribution telling me on my immediate signals, right? I always use the example, if I have 4 different creatives and one is giving me horrible last touch performance, I might just immediately make that decision to pivot, right? A little bit deviation is going to be natural, expected noise, and I'm going to wait maybe to see how that bears out in the longer term with kind of my multi-touch. But understanding the relationships between that, and again, some is going to be on frequency, some is going to be on creative, some is going to be on overall your attribution window. I think trying to take a step back and look at it holistically and using all of those that I just mentioned and more to just try to get better, right? Month over month, quarter over quarter, understand what immediate signals I have great confidence turn into those longer term purchase behavior, overall purchase count, overall lifetime value, depending on the vertical, sub vertical. And I think just coming to the realization that none of those is going to work in a vacuum, but understanding how they all interplay is the most critical. And that can be hard because oftentimes you have different subject matter or domain or even just data domain experts in that. But that holistic view has been the best strategy I've seen to be able to not only optimize efficiently, but learn and again change those metrics as time goes on. And again, that can change depending on what type of product. If it's one of your products that's been in marketplace for a long time, those strategies are going to look very different than something that has been newly launched. So that is, again, just another variable that needs to be kind of taken into account. And it's certainly not one size fits all.
I would just add that it, along with that experimentation, like the base premise there is that you are very clear on what the goal of the campaign is going out, right? Is this a brand reach that's going to have a completely different mix of tools that you're going to want to utilize? And if it is just straight conversion to a purchase, right, which is at least at the moment, it is not the majority of television campaigns. They're still broadly reach. But as we get more and more into streaming and streaming becomes the vast majority of consumption over time, this data sets are going to be much more actionable versus how we have been living off of, the outdated Nielsen households.
Yeah, and I think maybe this was obvious, but I'll say it. I think this goes back to having that data foundation, your identity customer 360 strategy in place, because you certainly can't measure well what you can't directly tie, whether that's deterministic in a lot of cases or probabilistic in others. So the better your data foundation is, even when it is fragmented, the more realistic answers you're going to get. And then when you start to move some of those levers, you should see results accordingly. Without a lot of good first and third party data, it is going to be much more difficult to actually be able to break this down, because you're going to start to lose scale very quickly as you start to try to triangulate on different variables.
And I would just going back to the AI piece of it, the thing that I think is really exciting about it is that it can really challenge the assumptions that we have historically made, just because I have a luxury car does not mean that I am the target audience for all luxury car creatives, right? There are other audiences out there, and we have made assumptions about what is the right creative for the right person. And only through the testing that Drew is talking about can we actually tell if that's going to give us the return we need.
So, Michael, just expanding on the AI piece now that you mentioned it, how are you seeing that it's being used to really refine these attribution models for campaigning, for streaming campaigns?
I mean, I think kind of as we were just talking about, it's pattern
Yeah.
recognition, right? Being able to create additional audience segments and audience segments that may not be what we have traditionally thought they were or thought they should be. So I would say the other side of it too is I've seen AI and machine learning really being used to optimize the opportunity placements within the actual content itself, right? You were talking about, well, if I've bought it, are they going to stop targeting me? Is that the good? Well, I mean, maybe for you, that is the right thing because these publishers, separate from the advertisers, are going to be checking and say, okay, did that cause churn? Did they bail on my video stream because they got hit by this creative? And now they can start to figure out what is the right mix for Nisha. If you're watching a long movie, I know you've gone like over an hour and 15 minutes in a 90-minute movie, and so I know I could probably push it a little bit to figure out how is the best return for me for those ad opportunities. I don't think we're quite seeing the level of ad insertion that we see on the traditional broadcast and cable, and I don't think we ever will on streaming. Well, maybe never say never, but at the moment, I don't think that that's where we are, because I also think because of these data strategies that we're discussing, the value of these opportunities becomes that much higher, both to the publisher and the advertiser, especially if they can be optimized through this quick testing and AI learning. And then lastly, but certainly not least, AI is starting to do some really, really interesting stuff when it comes to personalized creative creation. So that generative AI piece, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on how those creatives are represented within a traditional ad break or in non-traditional spaces throughout a video stream.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting to watch there. And if I'll just quickly ask you guys both, given all these advances in technology and AI and everything, I mean, what are you most excited about as you look out, over the next 1, 2, 3 years? Just you personally, what are you most excited about in this space? Maybe Michael, just over to you for that to start.
The things I'm most excited. I mean, I think it's a little bit just expanding on what I had said before, right? In that it is going to be the speed at which we are able to create a custom experience for both the consumer and the brand, and how we are able to connect, build that connective tissue, right? So I would say in both cases, I mean, how you collect, protect, and categorize your data in a way that you can fully utilize that. Like your information on engagement and purchase funnels and the audience and the content itself, like all of that is, I would say, almost as valuable, if not more, because we're talking about how you're actually generating revenue for your platform as the IP itself. And you need to think about it that way. Your data, like that is your value. And that you also have to make sure that how you're creating these audience segments and how you're positioning it to the broader marketplace align with how you are differentiating your service and your overall value proposition.
Yeah. And Drew, I'll ask the same, but I'll tweak yours a little bit too. And just thinking of like what's, given all the excitement, and I know you in particular as a technologist have, are quite excited about some of the trends that are coming. But what's one emerging trend in data or AI that you think the streaming world just isn't really paying enough attention to yet?
So I'll slightly tweak the answer. I don't think that it's not they're paying enough attention. I think the foundation is just not fully there. And again, I think it is that like truly unique customer journey through content and advertising. So matching creative tones, themes, messaging alongside the content. Maybe this is too utopic of a vision, but to Michael's earlier point, every incremental ad has the potential to harm engagement and subscription behavior, right? So I truly believe there's a world we can get to where the consumer sees less ads than they are today, but those ads are more impactful. So the marketers are willing to pay more. Everybody sort of wins in that scenario, right? They might be paying more per impression, but the overall ad load comes down. The publishers still make out the math checks out, so they're making more money serving less ads, and the marketers are actually getting more efficient advertising. That might be sort of the holy grail of all of this, but I'm a big believer that the connected television and the streaming platforms still have such a highly engaged audience on true top tier quality and some of the, you know, I guess I would say the impact of that is getting easier to measure, although it is still certainly not easy, but it is getting more possible to measure that at full scale. And I think that is the thing I am most excited about maybe several years out, because again, I think we also enhance the consumer experience, which is super important for the long-term health of all sides of the business.
Yeah, yeah. We just got a question, and which I think is an interesting one, and we could touch on it for a minute here. But the question is around machine learning models and how they heavily rely on large training data sets. How do we ensure that models remain relevant and accurate when they're primarily trained on older data sets? What are some of the best practices? Drew, if you can maybe touch on that real quick.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts in television is like seasonality matters so much, right? So you do need some of these older data sets. I think understanding what features are more rapid to move and where you might need to tweak the model for certain features that the last 4 weeks are actually going to be far more relevant than the last several years. And again, like there's always going to be macro and micro variables, and through continuous testing you're going to bear this out. And obviously sports plays into seasonality, just by the nature of scheduling, but there are certain types of content as well that are going to require separate models that may need less time but be hyper parameterized for what they actually are, like news, sports, all of that kind of comes to mind, where you can't just use, what's happening in daytime on Wednesday for year after year after year.
All right, I know we're almost out of time, but Michael, I just want to ask you one final question. If you could give one piece of advice to streaming platforms who are looking to future-proof their data and AI strategies over the next 2-3 years, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to go back and just reiterate that, like, you need to treat all of your data like you do the IP that you're shuffling around, the value there, and you need to be constantly iterating and basically positioning that along with the value that you're presenting for your platform, or your content if you're a specific service. I think that this is a space that is seeing increased competition, and even though you'll see a lot of the consumption that's happening kind of towards the top end of the funnel, your YouTubes, your Netflixes, your Amazons, but there is a whole segment there of people who are really chasing audience acquisition, protecting against churn, whether that's you can see also the ad tiers happening across all of these major streaming services now. And a lot of that has to do with the consumer's share of wallet that they are willing to currently spend on their entertainment practice, day over day, week over week. And people are coming in, right? They're coming in for one show and they're leaving maybe after that season is done. And that leads to exactly what Drew was talking about with the seasonality. So you need to also make sure that your programming schedule is accounting for that seasonality, and then that your marketing strategies are accounting for that, to make sure that, oh my God, we're getting towards the end and I know this is our tentpole, but like, what are we doing to maintain them? How are we identifying who these people are? And then, oh, if we can project that we're going to lose, this percentage because this show is going to end, how can we model out what the optimal audience for the next show is going to be, so we can try and even that out and still show continued growth month over month, quarter over quarter.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Drew, for sharing your expertise. And thanks to everyone for joining us. For those that are interested in learning more about how MediaMint and Snowflake can help you with your data and AI strategies, please feel free to reach out to us directly. We will be at Snowflake Summit in San Francisco on June 2nd through 5th, and would love to meet you there. So please, again, do reach out. And otherwise, thank you again and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So.